The soul wakes before the body knows it's alive. In that liminal space between dream and daylight, something ancient stirs, a voice that remembers what your mind has forgotten. Each morning you stand at the threshold of two worlds, the one that expects you to perform and the one that invites you to remember. You wake and immediately the weight returns, the unnamed heaviness that follows you from sleep into consciousness, like a shadow that belongs to someone else but clings to your skin. There's a part of you that feels exiled from your own life, going through motions while something essential remains locked away, whispering from behind the bars of routine. This is not about positive thinking or motivational mantras. This is about the archetypal power of dawn, when the psyche is most permeable, most willing to receive what the soul has been trying to say all night. Every morning is a rite of passage, a symbolic death and rebirth. The question is, will you sleepwalk through it or will you meet yourself at the altar of awakening? There was a woman who woke each morning with words caught in her throat. Not ordinary words. These were deeper, older. The voice of her soul, thick with dreams and memory. For years she silenced it with coffee and urgency, drowning the whisper with the noise of productivity. One morning, she woke before her alarm and heard it clearly. You have been speaking everyone else's language but your own. She realized that every time she rushed into the day without listening, she abandoned herself again. The voice wasn't demanding to be heard, it was pleading not to be forgotten. That morning, she whispered back, and for the first time in years, she felt like she was home in her own body. Carl Jung wrote about the necessity of morning dialogue with the unconscious, a practice he called active imagination. But this goes deeper than psychology. This is about remembering that you are not just a body moving through space, but a soul carrying ancient wisdom, generational memory, and archetypal truth. When you wake and immediately reach for your phone, you're choosing the collective noise over your individual soul. When you rush into productivity without pausing at the threshold, you're abandoning the most important conversation of your day, the one with yourself. Perhaps you recognize this, waking with a heaviness you can't name, a sense that something is missing but you don't know what. Maybe you've tried affirmations that felt hollow, or positive thinking that only seemed to push the shadow deeper. You're not broken, you're homesick for yourself. The 14 Soul Codes, Code 1. Today I remember I am not my fear. She stood at the edge of a cliff in her dream, not because she wanted to jump, but because something was calling from the other side. When she woke, her chest was tight with anxiety, the same anxiety that had been following her for months. But this morning she whispered, I am not my fear. Fear, in archetypal psychology, is often the shadow guardian, the energy that protects us from expansion by keeping us small. James Hillman called this the pathology of normalcy, the soul's rebellion against a life that's too narrow for its true nature. Your fear is not you, it's the voice of every ancestor who played it safe, every generation that chose survival over soul. When you whisper this code, you're not denying the fear, you're remembering that you are the one who can choose to listen to something deeper. The neuroscience is profound. Cortisol floods the system when we identify with our fear, but when we create space between self and emotion, the prefrontal cortex can engage. You become the witness, not the victim, of your own inner landscape. Do you feel it? That subtle shift when you remember you are larger than what frightens you. Code 2. My body is the oracle that reveals what the mind silences. There was a man who never understood why his stomach clenched every time he entered his office. His mind said he should be grateful. Good job, steady income. But his body was speaking a different language, the language of the soul that had been ignored for so long it could only communicate through symptoms. In the Sufi tradition, the body is considered the temple of divine revelation. Every sensation, every tightness, every inexplicable ache is the soul trying to break through the mind's defenses. Marion Woodman spent her life studying how the body holds what the psyche cannot yet speak. When your chest constricts, what is it protecting? When your shoulders carry invisible weight, whose burden have you inherited? Your body is not betraying you. It's serving as the oracle your ancestors never had, speaking the truths that your conditioning taught you to silence. This morning, place your hand on your heart and ask, what are you trying to tell me? Listen not with your mind, but with the deeper intelligence that lives in your cells, in your breath, in the spaces between your thoughts. Code 3. There's no need to rush. The soul's time is circular. She always felt behind, as if life was a race she was losing. Each morning brought the familiar urgency, deadlines, expectations, the relentless march of linear time. But the soul operates on a different rhythm, cyclical and seasonal, like the ancient festivals that honored the turning of the wheel. Indigenous cultures understood this, time as spiral, not line. Healing happens in waves, not stages. Growth occurs in seasons, not schedules. When you rush through your morning, you're abandoning the soul's natural rhythm for the world's artificial urgency. Chronos versus Kairos, clock time versus soul time. Chronos is the time of productivity and anxiety. Kairos is the time of meaning and presence. Every morning you choose which master to serve. What if the thing you're rushing toward is actually rushing away from you because you're not present enough to receive it? Code 4. Every emotion is an invitation, not a threat. The woman woke with sadness sitting on her chest like a cat that had found its favorite spot. Her first instinct was to shake it off, to caffeinate it away, to busy herself until it dissolved. But this morning she whispered, "What are you inviting me to see?" In Jungian psychology, emotions are not obstacles, they're messengers from the unconscious. Anger might be the soul's way of saying your boundaries have been violated. Sadness might be grief that's finally ready to be felt. Anxiety might be excitement without breath. Clarissa Pinkola Estes writes about staying with the affect, the practice of not running from what you feel, but turning toward it with curiosity. The nervous system calms when we stop treating emotions as emergencies and start recognizing them as information. When you wake with an inexplicable emotion, don't immediately try to fix or understand it. Breathe into it. Let it have space. Ask what it's trying to show you about your inner landscape. You are not responsible for having the emotion. You are only responsible for how you meet it. Code 5. What I feel deeply is exactly what I need to see. He had been avoiding the grief for months. The grief of a relationship that ended, a dream that died, a version of himself he had to outgrow. But every morning, it was there, waiting like a patient teacher. Finally, he stopped running. He sat with it. He let it teach him. Carl Jung said, "What you resist persists." But the deeper truth is, what you feel deeply is often pointing toward what you most need to heal or understand. The soul doesn't give us more than we can handle, but it gives us exactly what we're ready to integrate. Raw emotion is like a broken mirror. When you look closely, you can see all the fragments of yourself that have been scattered, waiting to be gathered back together. The tears you've been holding back might be carrying the salt of ancestral sorrow. The anger you've been suppressing might be the life force that's been buried under people-pleasing. In the polyvagal theory, Stephen Porges shows us that the nervous system is always seeking safety and connection. Sometimes the emotions that feel most threatening are actually the ones trying to lead us back to ourselves. What have you been feeling that you've been afraid to fully meet? Code 6. Silence is not absence, it's amplified presence. The noise followed her everywhere, not just the external chaos of notifications and traffic, but the internal commentary that never stopped. She feared quiet the way others fear falling, afraid that in the stillness she might discover something she wasn't ready to know. But silence was patient with her fear. It waited in the spaces between her thoughts, in the pause before her first breath each morning, in the moment just before sleep claimed her. And slowly silence began to reveal its secret. It wasn't empty at all. It was pregnant with everything she'd been too busy to hear. When the mental chatter finally exhausted itself, she discovered what the mystics have always known. In silence, the soul speaks its native language, not in words, but in knowing, not in explanations, but in recognition. Modern life has made us phobic of quiet, because silence is where the soul speaks loudest. We fill every moment with stimulation, every pause with entertainment, every quiet space with noise, because we're terrified of what we might hear if we actually listen. But silence is not empty. It's full of possibility, full of presence, full of the deeper intelligence that can only emerge when the surface mind finally stops its constant commentary. Ancient traditions call this the pregnant void, the space where everything is born. When we study the brain's patterns during rest, we discover something profound. The mind's background activity, its natural state when not focused on tasks, is where self-awareness emerges. The fear of silence is actually fear of meeting ourselves. This morning, can you sit with 3 minutes of quiet and listen to what emerges from the stillness? Code 7. I no longer abandon myself to be accepted. I learned to make myself smaller until I almost disappeared. I learned to swallow my truth until my throat closed. I learned to smile while my soul wept, to agree while my inner voice screamed rebellion, to say yes with my mouth while every cell in my body whispered no. I became a master of self-erasure, sculpting myself into whatever shape would keep me safe, loved, included. But the price was steep. I forgot my own face. I lost my own voice. I became a beautiful ghost haunting my own life. But every morning now, I remember, I no longer abandon myself to be accepted. This is the archetypal wound of the spiritual nice person, the one who gives and gives until there's nothing left, who says yes when the soul screams no, who performs kindness while genuine authenticity withers in the shadows. The trauma of invisibility teaches us that we must earn our right to exist, but the soul knows better. The soul knows that acceptance that requires self-abandonment is not love, it's transaction. Real belonging happens when you show up fully, not when you show up perfectly. When we trade our authenticity for approval, we're like flowers trying to bloom in artificial light. We might survive, but we'll never truly flourish. The deepest research on shame and belonging reveals what the heart already knows. Those who feel most worthy of love are the ones who believe they deserve it simply by virtue of existing. Where in your life are you still trading your truth for approval? Code 8. The shadow is not the enemy. It's exile waiting to be embraced. He ran from his darkness, but the darkness was faster. It lived in his dreams, in his sudden rages, in the jealousy that consumed him when others succeeded where he had failed. For years he believed that if he could just eliminate these parts of himself, he would finally be worthy of love. But the shadow doesn't disappear when ignored. It grows stronger in exile. What we reject in ourselves doesn't vanish. It simply puts on masks and sabotages us from within. His jealousy wasn't the problem. His shame about his jealousy was the prison. The shadow in the deep psychology of individuation is not evil, it's disowned. Every emotion you've been taught to hide, every desire labeled inappropriate, every aspect of your personality that doesn't fit the good person mold, these aren't flaws to eliminate. They're exiled parts of your wholeness, waiting at the threshold of consciousness for permission to come home. Often, our greatest gifts hide in what we most reject about ourselves. The anger we've buried might contain our healthy boundaries. The selfishness we've denied might hold our authentic needs. The darkness we've feared might be the fertile soil where our creativity grows. When we approach these exiled parts with curiosity instead of judgment, something magical happens. They transform from saboteur to ally. The inner critic becomes the discerning voice. The rebel becomes the authentic leader. The wounded child becomes the source of compassion. Modern therapeutic understanding reveals what ancient wisdom always knew. There are no bad parts of the psyche, only parts that have been forced into roles that don't serve them. Integration, not elimination, is the path to wholeness. What aspect of yourself have you been trying to exile, and what would it feel like to finally welcome it home? Code 9. My worth is not in my performance. It's in the silence between the applause. She had built her identity around achievement, grades, promotions, likes, validation, but every accomplishment felt hollow, like eating sugar when what she craved was nourishment. The applause was never enough because she was looking for external proof of an internal truth, that she mattered. The soul's worth is not contingent. It doesn't increase with success or decrease with failure. It exists in the space between doing and being, in the pause between accomplishment and the next goal, in the silence that exists before you prove anything to anyone. This is the difference between conditional and unconditional presence. Conditional presence says, I am valuable because of what I do. Unconditional presence says, I am valuable because I am. Viktor Frankl, surviving the Holocaust, discovered that meaning can't be taken away by external circumstances. The soul's worth is like that meaning, independent of performance, immune to criticism, unshakable even in the face of failure. Research in self-determination theory shows that intrinsic motivation, doing something because it aligns with your values, creates more satisfaction than extrinsic motivation. Doing something for external rewards. The soul knows the difference. Can you feel your worth in this moment, before you accomplish anything else today? Code 10. Each morning is a symbolic birth. The sun doesn't rise gradually. There's a moment when darkness gives way to light, when night surrenders to day. Each morning you participate in the cosmic ritual of renewal, the archetypal pattern of death and rebirth that governs all of life. But most mornings we sleepwalk through this miracle. We wake already thinking about yesterday's unfinished business or tomorrow's anxieties, missing the profound opportunity of this moment, to be born again, to choose again, to remember again who we truly are beneath all the roles and responsibilities. In many indigenous traditions, dawn is sacred time, the moment when the veil between worlds is thinnest, when prayers are most powerful, when the soul is most receptive to guidance. The Lakota say that morning prayers travel fastest because they rise with the sun. Joseph Campbell spoke of the hero's journey as a cycle of death and rebirth. Every morning you have the opportunity to begin that journey again, to leave behind who you were yesterday and discover who you might become today. Neuroplasticity research shows that the brain is most flexible upon waking. Neural pathways are more malleable, new connections more possible. Symbolically and scientifically, morning is the time of greatest potential for transformation. How would you greet this day if you truly believed you were being born into it for the first time? Code 11. I am not my past, but I carry its symbols on my skin. She looked in the mirror and saw her mother's worried expression, her father's defensive posture, her grandmother's tired eyes. For years, she thought she was doomed to repeat their patterns, to carry their wounds as her own destiny. But slowly, she learned to separate inheritance from identity. The past lives in our bodies as cellular memory, in our nervous systems as trauma responses, in our unconscious as archetypal patterns. We carry the symbols, not just our own experiences, but the unprocessed experiences of our lineage. This is not mysticism, this is epigenetics. Studies on transgenerational trauma show that the effects of historical trauma can be passed down through genetic expression. The Holocaust survivors' children showed changes in stress hormone profiles. The descendants of slaves carry the physiological markers of ancestral suffering. But here's the profound truth. We also carry ancestral resilience, ancestral wisdom, ancestral strength. Every ancestor who survived long enough to reproduce passed down not just their wounds, but their capacity to heal, to adapt, to transcend. Jungian analyst Clarissa Pinkola Estes calls this the wild nature, the indestructible essence that survives all attempts at domestication, all forms of oppression, all patterns of limitation. You are not just the product of your past, you are the transformation of it. What ancestral gift have you inherited along with the ancestral wounds, and how might your healing heal the lineage both forward and backward? Code 12. Intuition is my native language. I used to apologize for my knowing. I have a feeling, I would say, as if feeling was somehow inferior to thinking. Call it intuition, I would add, as if intuition needed permission to exist. I had been trained to trust data over instinct, logic over the deeper intelligence that lived in my bones. But every mistake I ever made came from betraying that first knowing, the whisper that spoke before my mind could rationalize, the body wisdom that contracted before my thoughts could explain why. I had learned to translate my soul's language into the world's language, and in the translation I lost the truth. Your body is a temple of ancient knowing. The belly that tightens when someone lies to you carries the wisdom of 1,000 ancestors who survived by reading energy, not words. The skin that crawls in certain spaces holds the memory of every boundary your lineage learned to honor. What we dismiss as just intuition is actually embodied intelligence, the nervous system processing patterns too subtle for conscious thought to track. The heart contains more neural pathways than many consider, speaking a language older than words. Indigenous cultures never forgot this. The body as oracle, sensation as scripture. We live in times that have severed us from this birthright, teaching us to doubt the very intelligence that kept our species alive for millennia. But you can reclaim your native tongue. You can remember that your first response is often your truest response, that your gut knows things your mind hasn't learned yet. What is your intuition trying to tell you that your rational mind keeps explaining away? Code 13. The pain I feel is also ancestral wisdom moving through me. The grief wasn't just mine. It carried the salt of every woman in my lineage who had swallowed her truth, the weight of every ancestor who had chosen survival over authenticity. I used to think I was broken, carrying wounds too heavy for one person to bear. Then I understood. I wasn't carrying them to suffer. I was carrying them to heal. There's a profound truth hidden in the way pain moves through families like water through stone, carving channels that shape generations. The anxiety you can't explain might be your great-grandmother's unprocessed fear. The rage that surprises you might be your grandfather's silenced voice, finally demanding to be heard. But here's what changes everything. You are not just the inheritor of wounds, you are the alchemist who can transform them. When we study how trauma echoes through generations, we discover something revolutionary. Healing moves both ways through time. Your courage to feel what others couldn't feel, to speak what others couldn't speak, creates ripples that heal the lineage both forward and backward. The body remembers what the mind forgets. Cells carry stories. Muscles hold memories. The nervous system inherits patterns that were never yours to begin with. But you, conscious, willing, present, you have the power to interrupt the pattern, to be the one who finally says, "This ends with me, and healing begins with me." In shamanic traditions, the wounded healer is sacred, the one who transforms personal suffering into medicine for the collective. Your pain is not punishment, it's preparation, not pathology, but prophecy. The soul's pain carries meaning, direction, the seed of your next evolution. What if the pain you've been trying to escape is actually the portal to your purpose? Code 14. I am not lost. I am in the process of reconnection. For months she felt adrift, disconnected from purpose, from passion, from the clear sense of direction she once had. She used to know exactly who she was and where she was going. Now she felt like a stranger in her own life. But lost, she learned, is just another word for becoming. The dark night of the soul is not pathology, it's initiation. St. John of the Cross described it as the necessary dissolution that precedes spiritual birth. Psychologically, it's what happens when old identity structures can no longer contain who you're becoming. The Japanese have a concept called mono-no-aware, the bittersweet awareness of the impermanence of all things. What feels like loss might be life-making space for something new to emerge. What feels like disconnection might be the soul's way of untangling you from what was never truly yours. In chaos theory, there's a concept called strange attractors, patterns that emerge from apparent randomness. What looks like meaningless wandering might actually be the soul's way of finding its true direction through a process too complex for the linear mind to follow. The caterpillar doesn't know it's becoming a butterfly when it enters the chrysalis. To the caterpillar, dissolution feels like death. But dissolution is not destruction, it's reorganization at the cellular level. What if this feeling of not knowing who you are is actually the beginning of discovering who you've always been? The ritual of morning remembrance. To whisper to yourself is to remember the invisible that sustains you. These codes are not affirmations to convince yourself of something untrue. They are reminders of what has always been true. Invitations to remember what the noise of the world has made you forget. The practice of sacred morning. When you wake tomorrow, before the phone, before the coffee, before the rush of day begins, take 3 breaths and choose one code that calls to you. Not the one you think you should choose, but the one that makes your body respond, that creates a subtle shift in your energy, that feels like recognition rather than resignation. Whisper it not as a demand, but as a prayer, not as a fix, but as a homecoming. Let it move through you like water finding its level, like breath finding its rhythm, like truth finding its voice. This is not about positive thinking. It's about authentic reconnection. It's about remembering that you are not just a collection of habits and reactions, but a soul with agency, with choice, with the power to create meaning from whatever circumstances you find yourself in. Each code as a key. These 14 codes are keys, and you are the temple that opens from within. Some days you'll need the key of courage, other days the key of self-compassion. Some mornings will call for the key of boundaries, others for the key of integration. Trust the intelligence that knows which key fits which lock. The morning ritual is not about perfection. It's about presence. Not about doing it right, but about doing it with intention. The soul doesn't need elaborate ceremonies. It needs authentic attention. The alchemy of remembrance. When you whisper to yourself with genuine tenderness, you participate in the ancient alchemy of remembrance. You transform the lead of unconscious living into the gold of conscious choice. You reclaim your power, not by fighting against what is, but by remembering who you are within what is. This is the deepest work, not changing yourself, but recognizing yourself. Not becoming someone new, but uncovering who you've always been beneath the layers of conditioning, trauma, and cultural expectation. The soul has been waiting for this conversation. It has been whispering through your dreams, your symptoms, your inexplicable longings, your moments of deep knowing. Now, in the sacred time of morning, you finally have the chance to whisper back. Final oracle. When the first word of the day is born from the soul, destiny bows to intention. The morning whisper is not just a practice, it's a pact with your deepest self, a daily recommitment to the relationship that matters most, the one between your conscious mind and your eternal soul. In this relationship, you are both the seeker and the teacher, both the question and the answer, both the broken one and the one who heals. Tomorrow morning, when you wake at the threshold between sleep and alertness, remember, you are not just starting another day. You are stepping into another opportunity to remember who you are, to choose how you want to meet your life, to whisper the ancient codes that unlock the temple of your own becoming. The soul is waiting. It has been waiting your whole life for you to remember that the conversation it wants to have with you is the most important conversation you'll ever have, not because it has all the answers, but because it knows all the right questions. And the first question is always the same. Are you ready to come home to yourself? In the space between sleeping and waking, between forgetting and remembering, between who you were and who you are becoming, the soul whispers its eternal truth. You have never been lost. You have only been learning how to find yourself.